welcome to Project 18. I'm Scott. I'm going to be your host today. Hey, I really appreciate the feedback that we're getting from many of you. You guys are submitting some amazing questions for us, and we're doing our very best to take a look at those and try to give you a solid biblical answer for some of the things you've been asking. But it's been really fun to get to know you guys at that level and that deeper level. So keep it up. Yeah, keep sending us those questions. We really appreciate it. Today, we are continuing our discussion about the third great rebellion of the Bible that's commonly known as the Tower of Babel event. And when we read about this, we go to the first book of the Bible, which is called Genesis, and we find this story in chapter 11. So, a little bit of background. The tower itself that the people constructed in Genesis 11 was known more commonly in Mesopotamia and in that region as a ziggurat. A ziggurat was this high tower building constructed in ancient Mesopotamia. If you looked at a map today, it would be our modern day Iraq. It forms the eastern boundary of what we call the Middle East today. That was part of this temple complex, and it was built to entice and invite a deity to come to you. They were built to locate this deity so that you could barter with it and have a relationship with it. So key to note about these ziggurat temples is that they worked actually to accomplish their purpose. They were real places of worship that were crafted to interact with real supernatural rebellious beings who wanted to be worshipped by humanity. These lesser Elohim that we talked about in earlier episodes were very real, and they freely accepted all of the worship that humanity gave them. They accepted that worship that was meant for Yahweh, the one true God alone. They liked the gifts of music that were offered there, the produce from the fields, the fruits, the grains, the sacrifices, and then they actually liked all the iconography, the statues and everything that were constructed as part of these ziggurat temples. So when we read about the story of Babel, this story takes place in this place where the ancient people, after Noah's flood, they settled, they congregated together, and Genesis 11:3 says to make a name for themselves. This is important. They fully intended to do what they wanted to do by manipulating these other supernatural beings through their wholesale worship of them. And the thing was, it would have worked. They would have accomplished exactly what they set out to do. Genesis 11:6 calls this out for us as one of the reasons why God at this point in time scatters the nations, because it says there, nothing they plan to do would be impossible for them. And Yahweh couldn't allow that. I mean, he loved humanity too much to give up on his plan for them. So if you remember, this was exactly the opposite of what God asked them to do. Worshiping him meant that they were to spread throughout the entire earth, not congregate in one spot. They were to multiply and co-rule with him as his imagers, as his earthly family. They were not to make their own name glorious and focus on themselves. Rather, they were to make his name famous and not their own. Here's what it says in earlier parts of Genesis. It says, God blessed them, and God said to them, be fruitful and multiply. Fill the earth and subdue it. You can find that in Genesis 1:26 and 27, and again in Genesis 9:7, which was the repeated mandate, even post-flood, after the what we talked about as the second Watcher rebellion of Genesis 6. So what happens here at Babel then is God scatters the people at Babel because of their desire to live without him. And from that point forward, a pantheon of other gods appears in the biblical narrative. It is commonplace to read about many, many other deities and national gods that are being worshipped. So the question is, what happened? I mean, have you ever wondered how historically everything went from one collective group of people who worshipped either Yahweh or they had no God, to this proliferation of like thousands of different, primarily territorial deities that were being worshipped? I mean, here's just a few examples of this in the Bible. You think about Abraham. Abraham's own parents are said to have worshipped other gods beyond the Euphrates River. Joshua chapter 24 and verse 2 tells us this. Who are these gods? When the Israelites are freed from Egypt, it's a judgment, literally according to Exodus 12:12, against all the gods of Egypt. Who are they? Where did they come from? You see this in Elijah when he challenges the prophets of Baal on Mount Carmel. When they fail, these prophets, they're trying to summon Baal and these deities. Elijah mocks them. This is actually a funny story, but it's tragic at the same time. He tells them to shout loudly, for he is a god. Maybe he's thinking it over. Maybe he hasn't. Maybe he's wandered away, or maybe he's on the road. Perhaps he's sleeping and will wake up. Judges 6:10 mentions also the gods of the Amorites. Daniel 10:20 calls out this event where the prince of Persia and the prince of Greece are mentioned in the context of supernatural beings who are working in concert with other powerful human leaders. Or how about some of the historical narratives from other nations too that we know more commonly in our lives today? I mean, can you think of any people group throughout history or even today that doesn't have like a supernatural religious mythology? Nearly every nation throughout history assumes a relationship with a divine being or beings. Think about this one. Like in Homer's Iliad, the Trojan War portrays like the reality of the Olympian gods, who are often aligned territorially. You have Athena supporting the Greeks and Apollos supporting the Trojans. The ancient Romans were no exception either. They worshipped a variety of deities that were associated with places and territories, some of which were even connected with specific locations, even the Roman state itself. And in fact, like even today, many facets of global religions are associated with certain geographical locations and cultural people groups. I've had the opportunity to travel to a lot of different countries, and specifically, like, let me give you an example. I did some work in Japan a while back, and it's really quite fascinating to see how, even from the mainland to some of the islands like Okinawa and some of the smaller islands like Iran and some of these other places, and especially from small island to small island, that each people group, each pocket of people, the Bible refers to them as ethne. It's where we get our word ethnic from. All of them have evolved to worship, and they have worship systems that at the core of their identity, most of which are centered, worship of geographical type of deities, geographical type of gods that specifically are there to help them out in that area. And just like Bible times, many of these false deities are worshipped for one of two reasons. They're either worshipped out of fear of what they might do to them if they're not worshipped, or this desire to manipulate them in order to bring favor upon the worshiper. So the proliferation of our own global religions today is actually a result of the Babel rebellion, and it becomes the backdrop of what we call spiritual warfare. Many of the gods that are worshipped today are actually still very real. I mean, they want it, they accept it from humanity, they delight in it, and in fact, these aren't necessarily like demons either. Many of these supernatural beings are something a bit more powerful according to the scriptures. So here's the thing. God still loves humanity enough that he's not going to allow us to go on this way forever. He has provided a way for us to continually worship him and him alone. The ancient readers of the Bible, to whom the Bible was written, they assumed the existence of these supernatural beings who were pursued by humanity. And the story from Genesis 12 through Revelation 22 is the story about how God reclaims the world that was dispersed at the Babel event in Genesis 10 and Genesis 11. So it's the story of how he defeats these lesser Elohim who receive worship through a myriad of religions ever since that time. Many of these gods behind the ancient religions and even our modern day religious systems are real. And even if we don't have like a roster of supernatural beings where they were assigned in like Deuteronomy 32, Genesis chapter 10 and 11, we don't know exactly which supernatural being is controlled or is in control of which territory. We don't have that. We do know the reality of these rebellious, powerful members of God's divine court, and that they desire and accept worship from human beings. I mean, that's the definition of spiritual warfare. It's the battle that Jesus frees us from. Let's think of it this way. Okay, I just mentioned Deuteronomy 32. If you go to Deuteronomy 32, verses 8 and 9, we discover there that this is the description of God. The Most High gave the nations their inheritance. He divided the human race. He set boundaries of the people according to the number of the sons of God. But the Lord's portion is his people, Jacob, his own inheritance. That's the details of Genesis 11 and 12. I mean, make note here, though, what I want us to take a look at is that God is called the Most High in this passage. The fact is that he's the Most High. When we talk about that, this means that there are some that are lower. It makes sense, right? Specifically, the supernatural beings to whom he entrusts the rest of humanity, which he has dispersed. But his nation, the people that he's going to continue the mandate to multiply, to flourish, to co-rule with, to worship and image him, those will be his portion. Now, what I'm not saying here is that there are multiple gods out there. There's one true God who created other supernatural beings that also he has entrusted power as they rule over some locations in mankind. Now it's a matter of Yahweh, however, versing these lesser Elohim. In fact, the very way that he calls out Abraham, who's going to be the father of his nation, his people, will prove to all these other lesser ones that he is the Most High One, the all-powerful one, the one who is the true life giver. Think about it this way. He starts to build his own nation by calling out a guy who physically can't even have children because he's 99 years old. He does this to help prove this power as the one true God above all the other supernatural beings. It would take a miracle to start a nation with Abraham, and the message is clear to all the other supernatural beings and to humans alike. There is only one Most High God, and he will ultimately restore his original Edenic plan to rule with humanity. And the incarnation of Jesus was the death knell of these lesser deities. Through his life, death, burial, resurrection, and ascension, he defeated every last rebel Elohim. And he empowers us to free humanity from their clutches as well. So let's pivot to the New Testament a minute and see how this plays out there. Let's consider what Paul wrote about this spiritual warfare, this battle for God to free us from the control of these other supernatural beings in the New Testament. It seems he often had these supernatural beings on his mind when he penned some of his letters. Let's start with the book of Ephesians. So couched in the very famous part of chapter 6, where it talks about spiritual warfare, we read in verse 12, "For our struggle is not against flesh and blood, but against the rulers, against the authorities, against the cosmic powers of darkness, against evil spiritual forces in all the heavens." So all of these terms that Paul cites to describe supernatural beings are largely geographical descriptors. I mean, he gets it. He's the apostle to the Gentiles, and the Gentiles are every other nation besides Israel. He's the one who considers himself, and by the call of God, is the one who's going out to those different countries under the control of those that were surrendered at the Tower of Babel, which means that every nation besides Israel he's going to try to get to. He's the guy going out onto their turf. He knows his opponent, and he knows the power that they have over people. He understands he's going up against the religious systems and the worship of these false deities that have their roots far back into the supernatural events leading up to the dispersal of the nations. He knows that many people he will talk to will have that same worldview. He knows that they fear abandoning their gods for an unknown God. It will mean everything will be turned upside down for them, right? I mean, he gets it. He understands their fear and what he's asking them to believe, that Yahweh is the one who's going to rescue them, that Jesus was the one that provided that method. I mean, this reaction is very clear. You look at Acts 14, verses 11 to 13. It's totally understandable. Here's what happens to him when he's on one of these missionary journeys to a place called Lystra. When the crowd saw that Paul and everything that he had done, they shouted, saying in their Lycaonian language, "The gods have come down to us in human form." His friend that was with him was named Barnabas. Barnabas they called Zeus, and Paul Hermes, because he was the chief speaker. The priests of Zeus, who were worshiping in that temple just outside of the town, brought bulls and wreaths to the gates because he intended with the crowds to offer sacrifices to them. See, here's the thing. They believed in the reality of these other gods, and they framed their encounter with Paul and Barnabas accordingly. They knew it. Paul knew it. He understood their worldview, and the recipients of the New Testament, to whom it was written and written for, understand that they understood that as well. I mean, it's the foundational thought behind Paul's statement in Romans 11, verses 25. He says, "I don't want you to be ignorant of this mystery, brothers and sisters, so that you will not be conceited. A partial hardening has come upon Israel until the fullness of the Gentiles come in." So the question is, what is the fullness of the Gentiles? For Paul, reaching every last nation that was under the supervision of these lesser rebellious Elohim was a priority. That fullness, or that completion, to use a different word, of the task would inaugurate a new part of God's plan involving Israel. In fact, I think Paul was convinced that, and he was driven to personally try to get to every last one of those geographical areas listed in what we call the Table of Nations in Genesis 10. And you remember, those are the locations that were dispersed in the Tower of Babel event. So Genesis 10 gives us the result of Genesis 11. Those were the areas where humanity had been dispersed. And when you get back to the New Testament, Paul understood this. I mean, you look in Romans a few chapters later, Romans 15 verses 23 and 24 says, "But I no longer have to work to do in any of these other regions. I have strongly desired for many years to come to you whenever I travel to Spain. For I hope to see you as I pass through, to be assisted by you for my journey there, once I have first enjoyed your company for a while." And again, you see this same thing about Spain come up in Romans 15, verse 28. "So when I have finished this and safely delivered funds to these people," he's bringing money to a different church, "I will visit you on the way to Spain." And so you read that, and it's easy to read over, but you got to ask the question, like, why Spain? Why is he trying to get to Spain? Well, it has to do with the day of Pentecost being the reversal of the Babel dispersion. We talked about this in the previous episode. If you want to know a little bit more about that, I'd encourage you to check that out. But at the day of Pentecost, all the regions that are listed in Genesis 10 are also present in Acts chapter 2. That is, with the notable exception of one location. If you were to lay a map, in other words, of Genesis 10 over Acts chapter 2 and look at all those nations, you would notice that the very westernmost settlement from Genesis 10 is a place called Tarshish. Genesis 10:4 and is not included in Acts chapter 2. That was the westernmost part of that map would be Rome. And so Paul knew his Old Testament. He knew his Torah. He's smart. He's passionate, right? Everything he does is now done for Jesus. He had the encounter on the road to Damascus. That's his passion. That's his heart. I mean, consider what's said in Acts 20:24. But I consider my life of no value to myself. My purpose is to finish my course and the ministry I've received from the Lord Jesus Christ, to testify of the gospel of God's grace. That's who Paul was. That's what he was doing. And then there's right smack in the middle of all this Spain talk in 15:20 in Romans. He says this, right in the middle of all that, he says, my aim is to preach the gospel where Christ has not been. And so he's thinking Spain, because the same location that's called Tarshish in Genesis chapter 10 in Paul's present day was called Spain. And he wants desperately to get there because he sees it as the last frontier of the Gentile nations to be rescued by Jesus. That's that outpost where the nations were dispersed, and he wants to get there because he's the missionary to the Gentile. He wants to bring the message of the conquering Savior to reclaim Spain for Yahweh. He wants to free them from the false worship of these other gods. So how's that work for us today then? So every good evangelical church, consider this, has Matthew 28:18-20 plastered with a lovely banner across their missions page on their website, right? We quote it, we love it, we use it to raise money, we sometimes use it to cast guilt. It's one of our favorite pieces of ammunition to shoot from our gospel pistols. I mean, but what does it really mean? You have to start with the words of verse 18. Jesus says, all authority has been given to me in heaven and on earth, because he defeats every last Elohim and the original rebel, Satan, even the powerful king of the dead, who he's also called, and the underworld. He has the authority to reclaim those nations. He has earned it by paying the penalty for humanity's rebellion, and the time has come to reclaim those nations as well. And the way that that happens is by going out into the world, by making disciples of all of these nations through the power of his Spirit. Remember, the Spirit was sent in Acts chapter 2, and that was a reversal of the Babel event. And now we have his Spirit within us. We are partnering with God to be able to free these nations from false religions and their systems and devotion to these lesser created Elohim. So, where does that all of that leave us today? Couple of thoughts here to wrap up what we've been talking about. So I hope we're beginning to have clarity about several things that we see happening now, even in our 21st century world. First of all, there is a belief system today that has millions of adherents that's called universalism. Universalism is this belief that all human beings will ultimately be saved and that they will be reconciled to God regardless of their faith or actions during their lifetime. I mean, in short, it doesn't matter. This is what universalism says. It doesn't matter what path you take, what world religion you have, what God you worship. They're all just kind of local and cultural expressions that really don't matter, because everyone will end up kind of ultimately in the same place, so to speak. This is heresy. The narrative of the scriptures clearly point out that there is only one God that is worthy of worship and our loyalty, and that he alone has been the one to defeat all the lesser supernatural beings that are masquerading themselves as God. This is the reality behind a verse commonly known in evangelical circles. Many churches know this, and many of them talk about this verse. If you're unfamiliar with it, it's found in John chapter 14 in the New Testament. In verse 6, here's what it says. It says, Jesus told him, I am the way, the truth, and the life. No one comes to the Father except through me. So the other big thing to note here is that perhaps the biggest takeaway with all of this is I really hope that you are struck, as I am, with like a profound sense of the incredible love that God has for us. He loves humanity at such an amazing depth that even when we want nothing more than to abandon his truth, his goodness, and his beauty, he still wants to partner with us. He still wants us as his earthly family and have us image him to all of the world. In fact, he so powerfully pursues us that he paid the ultimate price in the battle for our souls. He sacrificed himself in order that we can be freed from the powers of these supernatural beings and even free from our own personal rebellion called sin. Let that sink in for just a minute. Galatians 5:1, which is a book in the New Testament, it's one of those ones that Paul wrote. I love how it puts us in chapter 5 and verse 1, this freedom that we have. It says, "For freedom, Christ has set us free. Stand firm then, and don't submit again to a yoke of slavery." So this slavery that happens with all these other deities and following them and worshiping them and trying to manipulate them out of fear, we are freed from that through Christ. So if you feel overwhelmed today, very practically speaking, maybe it seems like the evil in this world is prevailing, or that there isn't much hope to even go around these days, and I want to encourage you to remember the authority of Jesus. No matter how bad this world gets, he is the only one that will ultimately win. He is the one who has called us to remain faithful, to remain loyal, and to rescue people from the bondage of fear in this world. And every last one of these rebellious supernatural beings that robs him of his rightful worship will one day be defeated. Hebrews, great place to understand this in a little bit greater depth. Hebrews is a book in the New Testament. Chapter 1, verses 10 to 13 reminds us of this. It says, in the beginning, Lord, you established the earth and the heavens in the work of your hands. They will perish, but you will remain. They will all wear out like clothing. You will roll them up like a cloak, and they will be changed like clothing. But you are the same, and your years will never end. Now to which of the angels has he ever said, sit at my right hand until I make your enemies your footstools? One day God will prevail. God will take care of and eradicate all these other lesser beings that are being worshipped, and they will be judged, and we have the ability, the privilege to be on his side. As always, folks, if you have any questions, or if you'd like someone to talk to, maybe this is an area of concern for you, maybe we're talking about some things you'd like some more context about, please reach out to me. It's anonymous through the link that's in the description of the podcast. We'd love to hear for you. We have a couple exciting things that are coming up as well. For those of you who don't know, we are also on YouTube. You can join us there and check us out through the link that's in the description. The next episode that will be released will be a training that we're doing about the giants and the Nephilim in the scriptures. So I encourage you to look forward to that as well. But yeah, just if you need somebody to come alongside of you and pray with you and talk about these things, we're here for you. We'd love to interact with you. So thank you for joining us today. Take good care, and God bless.